we go. All right. So in this case, I want to start a new scene, right? Because our last video, we really just showed how we could use our screw modifier and curves to kind of create a column, right? And that was kind of cool. That was neat. We saw how we could control the different resolutions, right? But in this case, I want to start a whole new scene, right? So in this case, I want to build the room. The actual building and stuff is going to go into. So of course, when we first come in, right, we see the splash screen. We click on General for New File, and that will create a cube for us. Now remember, I do like to switch to Modeling Workspace, right, because that kind of gets rid of some of the interface down here to give us a little more screen real estate. Remember also, we don't want to get rid of our camera and our light, but in Outliner, we do have visibility options, right? The eyeballs that you can click on to turn visibility off. Now, in this case, I don't really want to start with a cube, right? So I'm going to go to 4 for object. Remember, that's going to be one of our quizzes, right? 4 for object mode, although it is up here as well. And of course, I can hit delete on my keyboard, right? Delete. What that does, it gets rid of that object altogether. Now, of course, in object mode, you'll see we still have a couple of options, the menus up here, right? Remember, screenshots for our progress checks today, right? Window menu up here, save screenshot, right? That's how easy it is to do your progress check screenshots. But I want to go to Add, Mesh, but in this case, I don't want to do a cube this time, right? We do have other primitives besides the cube, right? It's often quite useful for what we've been doing, but in this case, I kind of want to make a cylinder, kind of like an arched ceiling, right, for part of my room. Technically, there's a polybuild tool in Blender. I find it's a little weird, right? It's actually kind of one of those areas in Blender where I'm kind of like, I think they could have kind of done that a bit better. As amazing as Blender is most of the time, that's kind of one of the areas I'm like, So we're actually going to build our room from primitive shapes, right? So I'm going to go to Mesh Cylinder, right? Add Mesh Cylinder. Now, by default, it drops the cylinder in, and you'll actually see in the bottom left corner is the Add Cylinder, right? So when you create a new primitive for the first time, you will actually see it has its own little option, right? There's that bottom left corner. We've talked about it a bunch in lectures previously, in review lectures, right? So if I click on the Add Cylinder button, you'll see, of course, I could rotate it here if I want to, although I'm going to use the regular rotate tool so that these will stay all zeros. That way I don't have to kind of apply transforms. At least not yet. Vertices, though, up here 32. The vertices controller for the Add Cylinder is how many sides this has, going around kind of your diameter or your circumference, right? Go around this way. 32. That's actually good. So honestly, the default cylinder for this kind of arched ceiling, the 32 will work fine. We're actually going to get rid of half of it anyways, and we want to have enough geometry that will look good in low res. But I just want to make sure that you see that you actually have, at the bottom left corner, an Add Cylinder Options box that has how many sides it can have going around the diameter. And of course, even things like radius and depth. All right, so just kind of a little about that. Now in this case, I want to edit this, right? I want to rotate it, but I want to rotate the polygons, not the object. So I'm going to hit 3 for edit mode, right? Remember, look on the board, right? Face select 3. But remember, we have 2 modes here, object mode, edit mode. Once you're in edit mode, you will have these buttons available. Of course, they have great quick keys for them. 1, 2, 3, 4 for object mode, right? That's why we're doing quizzes on those, mini quizzes. But 3 for face mode. And it should have all the faces selected because we had the object selected. If for whatever reason it doesn't, remember, select menu, select all, right? There is actually a bunch of great selection tools in here. Many of them have quick keys already. But, you know, there's a lot of quick keys. So I often like to make sure show you guys in the menus as well, so you know where you can look for it if you don't know the quick key yet, right? Or you haven't studied the quick key yet. I'm going to hit E for rotate, right? Remember, your move, rotate, scale tools are right here, but W, E, R, because we're using industry compatible, are right here. And of course, it brings up our rotate handle. Now in this case, I want to rotate it this way, so it's kind of on its side. So I'm going to grab the X, the red, left click drag on it to rotate it down. Now I don't have to rotate it all the way flat, because the moment I turn the rotate tool on and I actually select and move one of these handles, you will notice that in the bottom left corner, like we've seen a bunch with bevel and all that stuff, there's now a little small kind of black menu here that says rotate. You click on it, it opens it up, and there's your angle. Remember we kind of saw that when we were doing stuff with our chair or our curve the other day, right? That we could actually get that access to that with the curve we were rotating. So I'm going to type in 90, and that'll rotate it exactly to 90 degrees, right? So that'll rotate it exactly to 90 degrees. All right, so that gets us kind of having this on its side. Now, of course, I can make this a lot bigger, so I could hit R for scale. Remember, we could left-click drag on these white circles to scale up, right? Make this larger. I also probably want to make it longer this way, so I could left-click drag on the green to make it longer. There we go. Maybe W for move to move it up a little bit so it's not exactly on the 0 of the world. Remember, R is scale, W is move, E is rotate. They are right here. They have their own handles. Remember that white one allows us to uniform scale. It scales all at the same time. Although middle mouse button does that as well. And you see we've kind of got a basic arched ceiling now for this, right? A basic arched ceiling. Now I'm going to go to 1 for vertex mode, right? 1 is edit mode for vertex. Remember, Q is your selection tool. So if you don't want your move, rotate, or scale tool being in the way, you can always just hit Q. Now, I actually want to be able to delete this in half, right? But right now, even though I could delete half of these polygons here, you will notice that I've got this giant circle polygon. This big 32-sided n-gon on the ends here. So what I want to be able to do is I want to be able to kind of cut this in half. The easiest way to do that is to go to 1 for vertex mode, right? And remember, we're going to do a review lecture on this as well. This is just our first lecture on it. I'm recording it, right? So if I left-click on that vertex, and then I shift left-click on this, right? Remember, shift adds to selections. I could basically select vertices right across from each other that look like they're basically right in the middle. We've started to see the right-click menu, right? So if you right-click, remember that brings up your context menu, right? And inside of that context menu, you see it's vertex. And you see there's a tool right down here that says connect vertex pairs. So if you just select 2 vertices and you right-click, it brings up your vertex context menu. And there's an area called connect vertex pairs. And what that does, that makes an edge between those 2 vertices. So what we'll do is we'll go to the back and do the same thing on the back. Left-click on just that vertex. Shift left-click on the one across from it, just so there's 2 selected. Right, remember, we're in vertex mode. Left-click, shift left-click. Right-click brings up your vertex context menu, right? We've seen this as object context lately, but really it depends on what selection type you're in, right? And you see there is a tool, connect vertex pairs. What that does, like we said, is it makes an edge between those vertices. So now if I go to 3 for face mode again, right? Remember, I'm already in edit mode. 1, 2, 3 are the quick keys for it, but there is vertex, edge, and face right here. You will now notice there are 2 polygons here. And so I could select that one and delete faces, right? Technically, you turn X-ray on to select through everything, but in this case, I think we'll just delete them one on one. Delete faces, right? And remember, our select tool is the select box right now, right? Q. It's right up here. Remember, Q will toggle through, though, right? See how it toggles through, and it toggles back to that box select one. With the one that's kind of like that orange dotted box, or dashed box, you can left-click drag a box. And over polygons that box touches, or inside of it, right? So I do it big enough to kind of get everything. You see how I can select all of those bottom ones? And of course, we can hit delete. So once again, we're just deleting, right? Delete brings up the delete menu. We want to delete faces. And now you see we have kind of half of a cylinder. We've kind of got like an arched ceiling here. Now, I've got a hole here though, right? There's no polygon there. So if I go to 2 for edge mode, and in many ways this is the hardest part because everything else is going to be extrude, and then I'm going to show you how to turn on snap to grid, basically, and that's going to be it, right? So I go to 2 for edge mode. I double left click on this edge right here because remember, double left click selects an edge loop. In this case, it's a border edge loop, right? There's no polygons there. There's a hole. So how do you fill in a hole, right? How do you make a polygon where there's no polygon, particularly in this area where there's an open bottom? Well, once again, that is right click, right? Remember, if you right click, it brings up a menu that is a context menu, and it's based on what selection you have. In this case, you notice how it's now edge selection, right? And you'll see there's a new face from edges, right? New face from edges. You can actually see one of the objectives on the board, right? What that does is that creates a polygon filling in that hole right there. Now it's already selected, so we can just hit 3 to go to face mode, and you see how it keeps that selected. So Blender, remember, is pretty good about converting one selection type to another automatically when you switch. It's not perfect all the time, but it's pretty good. But if not, you can always just left click on that face to make sure it's selected. Now the easy part is basically extrude. Right? Remember having an extrude tool right here? Extrude. This is basically kind of flat along normal direction, so I can just grab on that yellow kind of plus handle here. Left click, drag down. Now here's the thing. If you want this to be exactly flat on the bottom, switch to W for move. And you see right up here towards the top, it's kind of right below the animation, rendering, compositing workspaces. You see there's global. You'll see there's kind of your pivot point. These are actually quite neat, and Blender does them quite well. We're not quite ready for them. We haven't really needed them yet. We'll see these definitely more on our spaceship for our later project. So we are eventually going to dive into these more, just not yet. But you'll notice right next to those, kind of that same area, is what looks like a magnet icon. If you leave your cursor over it, it says snap. I can click on that magnet. See how it's blue now? That means snap is on. I think 1 or 2 of you actually run into the snap accidentally being on, and you're like, what's going on when I move, rotate, or scale this? Just make sure you didn't accidentally turn snap on. Look and see if that magnet's blue. It's a toggle. So you click on it, turns it off or on. You will notice next to it, though, is a little pull-down menu, right? So there's the magnet, and then right next to it's kind of a little menu. If I left-click on that, here's all your other options for snapping. You can snap to edge centers, to volumes, to faces, to edges, to vertices. Blender's got pretty nice snapping tools, actually. However, the default one is usually increment, and that's the one we want. And you see there's a little checkbox down here that says absolute grid snap. This will allow it to snap exactly to the grid squares. So particularly if you're laying out a building and you want it to be a little more precisely aligned to grid squares and grid units, this is where you can actually go into snap, right? Turn it off or on. Click on this, make sure increment's on, turn on absolute grid snap. And now you'll see if I left click drag on that blue arrow, it'll snap to the bottom floor, the grid. I can now go to actually grab some other polygons to kind of create more of our kind of hallway here, right? So if I want, I can select this face, extrude it, grabbing that yellow plus, and you see how as I extrude it out, it snaps to grid units. Now, here's one of the cool things about Blender, is the tool's still on. You can generally select through, particularly if select box or active tool are on, to other faces, and then extrude those out. So you don't even have to turn your extrude tool off to do this. You can just go select another polygon to extrude. You don't have to, right? You can turn your extrude off, select it, but you can actually just leave the extrude tool on and then just extrude out more. With that snap to grid on, you see how it can snap to grid units. Now this works with any selection type. I can go back to W if I want to. I could go to 2 for edge mode, right, for edges. I could always select on this edge, maybe move it in 1 to snap it to this grid unit. Grab this one, snap it to that grid unit. And you see how any selection type could really be snapped to these grids. So this gives you a bit more precision modeling if you want it. I think that'll work pretty well for our snap tools. Turn magnet off. Now, if you want to see this inside out, because most of the time we're outside of stuff, right? Our table, our chair, we're outside of it, right? We're outside of it. A room is the kind of thing, though, that you're inside of. So remember, normal direction is the direction a polygon is facing or pointing. Right now, the normals for this room are facing outward. So if I go to 3 for face mode, and I just do select all, you will notice in the mesh menu, there is an area called normals flip. And that'll flip those polygons to face inward. Right now, it doesn't look like it did anything, but if you go up to these controls right up here, remember I have these little balls up here? Wireframe, shaded, that's texture with Eevee. But we want the shaded one, which is kind of the white solid sphere or circle there. You'll notice there is a little V at the end of it here. If I click on that, I can turn on Backface Culling, and what it shows is only one side of the mesh. Most of the time you're fine with that being off, but maybe when you're working on a room like this, you want it on so you can see inside of your room. And of course, I can go File, Save As, or to save. And I can call this, 3D modeling B underscore room. There we go. And now I've got my room saved. Obviously, we're going to do some more modeling on this. I'm going to show you guys how to put some windows and doorways in here. So we'll do a little more later this week on it. But I think it's a great start for the room.